Welcome, everyone. Happy New Year. It's been a bit since we've been together for the seminar. I'm James Postdoctoral. I'm the chair of the ARA Systematic Review and Meta-Analysis SIG. And today I'm really pleased to introduce Dr. Marta Topor. Marta is a postdoctoral scholar at Linköping University in Sweden in their division of disability research. She holds a PhD in psychology from the University of Surrey, and she studies the development of cognitive and motor processes. She's also been quite active in the realm of meta-science and been making efforts at improving the transparency and reproducibility of social science research. And her topic for today is very connected to those efforts, specifically around the pre-registration and of systematic reviews. So we'll follow our usual ground rules. Marta will present for about 30 minutes, maybe a little over that. If you have questions during her presentation, feel free to punch them into the chat on Zoom, and we will monitor the chat. If there's anything that's super urgent, maybe we'll interrupt Marta. Otherwise, we'll use that as the basis for our discussion after the presentation. We should have plenty of time for discussion and questions. So feel free to to have a bunch of questions ready. With that, I will pass it over to Marta.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here and see so many people joining. I'll just share my screen to get my presentation ready. We have tested this. Got to swap again. There we go. Okay, I'll just change the windows so I can see my slides. Okay, so today I will talk to you about overcoming barriers to conducting systematic reviews of non-intervention research. And this is work that I have been doing kind of on the side of my normal PhD work and postdoc work as well. And it comes from my passion to improving transparency and integrity of research. And I think that evidence synthesis, including systematic reviews, is a really important part of that. And that's why I have been drawn to this topic. And I'm very excited to speak to you today about this as well. So I will start with a little bit of background about myself. My PhD was in cognitive psychology, neuroscience, neurodevelopment. My methods, primary methods that I worked with since my master's studies was cross-sectional and experimental designs. And I worked with cognitive tasks, cognitive assessments, EEG measurements, and that applied to both adults and children. We also used questionnaires and self-reports, self-reports or parent reports as well. So that was the basis of my first development as a researcher, where I also came across systematic reviews for the first time. Then I moved on to my first postdoc in Copenhagen in Denmark, where I worked with a team at a sports department for 2 years. And we actually did some educational interventions there. So I did work with interventional research as well. And now I work at Linköping University in Sweden, where I focus on meta-science, and I'm back to more cross-sectional and experimental research that I'm either coordinating or contributing to. And here you can see more or less a bit of a mix of experiences. But it's quite important to know that the systematic reviews came to me at this point when I wasn't yet familiar with interventions too much. And at this point, I also started reading a lot about the credibility revolution and thinking about open science and reproducibility and pre-registrations and things like that. Actually, that was I was pretty obsessed about this during my PhD, and it really enriched my experience as a PhD student at this point as well. And so my presentation today will focus on the barriers to doing systematic reviews based on my experiences and the experiences of my colleagues. And then we will talk about some solutions that me and my colleagues have come up with, which led to a big collaboration, and then some ideas for the future and where else we can go with our work as well. So starting with the barriers, I'm guessing that I don't have to tell you all the benefits of systematic reviews or evidence synthesis, but it helps to lay it out as to why people would be attracted to this if they are not from the traditionally interventional fields of research. So here, the traditional fields, we would be talking about clinical, educational, or health research, where there is a use of some kinds of interventions, and systematic reviews or meta-analyses are used to evaluate the efficacy of these interventions. However, the benefits, as you can see here, which are listed, of systematic reviews are not necessarily tied to interventional research so much. So through systematic reviews, we get in-depth knowledge of the literature. We try to get rid of the biases that come up in the research fields if we are just oriented around one specific area of how the topic is being researched, and through a systematic review, we can discover all of the literature that we were not aware of before. And that way also become aware of gaps and issues, get some knowledge about the quality of the studies. And also when doing the systematic reviews, because it has been such a big area of methodological approach to research, we find that there are a lot of guidance tools available to pick up and then start doing your own systematic review as well. So that is also very attractive. And then further benefits, once you get into the topic and think about it a bit more, perhaps it opens doors to new collaborations, a publication, and gives you a stronger base for developing your research further. So knowing all those things when learning about systematic reviews or meta-analysis for the first time sounds absolutely great. So when I figured that out for the first time, I was like, wow, cool. I want to do a systematic review. And I wasn't the only one. However, as I already introduced to you, my area of research was a bit different to the traditional one, and I was focusing more on cross-sectional experimental research. And I thought that the point of doing a systematic review in my situation would be to synthesize the knowledge and understand the field in terms of perhaps the theories that have been proposed to explain different mechanisms that happen in the brain, for instance. So which theories are supported by the data? Also to find out whether the results that have been found in the literature are consistent. The funny thing about cognitive research that can happen is that the direction of the results go in different ways as well. So I guess with interventions, you also can have interventions that work and make progress, and the ones that maybe cause harm and something goes wrong. The same way is possible in cognitive research, especially if it's a topic that isn't very well known, that it kind of just goes in different directions. So a systematic review is a great way of figuring out what have people found in the field before. And then, as in interventional research, we find the sources of heterogeneity, confounds. We can also do systematic reviews that specifically focus on the use of different methodologies and analyses, and how those impact our understanding of the cognitive mechanisms that happen in the brain. And then, yeah, we try to find out what we know and what we don't know, and it becomes a big mess. So here I prepared for you a slide that is a little bit busy, but I'll take you through it. Considering all these different aims that we could follow to do a systematic review in research that doesn't include interventions, which I just discussed, I have collected some of the cases of myself and my collaborators where we struggled the most trying to apply systematic review methodology to our fields. So for the first case, that was me. And I was discovering systematic reviews as part of a course, I think, for a master's. And here I wanted to use this opportunity to create a systematic review in preparation for my literature review for a PhD project I was proposing at the time. So I thought that this was perfect. And this was on the motor functioning and cognition, about the link between motor and cognitive functioning, actually. And I think that was focused on adults at the time. So I went to the university expert at the time, who was very experienced in doing systematic reviews, and all the tools and guidance that he could give me was unfortunately tailored to health research. And I could not follow this, and I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to structure my research questions and aims and what I was looking for in my systematic review as a student preparing my first literature review. And I had to just end up fixing the items in the guidance tool by myself and trying to make it suitable for my aims. But I didn't know what I was doing, so this was a bit of a disaster. And as you may guess, it was giving me such a big headache that I decided not to do it in the end. But I wish it was possible or easier to implement at that time. A colleague of mine who was also in cognitive neuroscience and working on executive functioning in Parkinson's, she also found that research questions didn't fit the PCOS model. And for those of you who are not super familiar with PCOS, I put the acronym here on the screen as well. There was also a big problem with the risk of bias and quality assessment. And for my colleague, that was the biggest hurdle she can get through. It was also part of her PhD that she was doing there. She couldn't find a tool that would help her to evaluate whether the kind of experimental research that she was reviewing was of a good quality and whether it was free of bias. So she tried making a bespoke tool, which was kind of copying and pasting bits and pieces of different tools she found, but she was not confident in whether what she's doing is the right choice and the right way to go. And there was nobody who could tell her that, yes, you're having a right approach, because validating this approach would also be, let's say, a study on its own before being able to conduct the actual systematic review. And the last example here is a friend who did a PhD in jury decision-making in criminal trials. And she also found that PCOS was not appropriate. The guidance didn't align with her aims and methods, and the risk of bias and quality assessment were also problematic. So we're getting the same story kind of between different people who are trying to use systematic reviews methodology in their non-interventional work. And so here we have come to the conclusion that we need to do something and find solutions. And the kind of areas of problems that I can summarize for you that we were looking at is the fact that there was a lack of guidance tools aligned with the aims and methods that we needed. There was a lack of guidance for relevant risk of bias and quality assessment, and the PCOS was not really fitting too well. And then we also found we were all connected by this enthusiasm towards open and reproducible research. So we thought that this is also something that will help to make this work good and help with the integrity and transparency as well. So Jade Pickering, who is a friend of mine and a colleague for a few years now, I think we calculated now 5 years, we have been collaborating on this. We started coordinating an international collaboration called the Non-Intervention Open and Reproducible Evidence Synthesis, and we call it ourselves NIROES. The non-intervention part has been pretty tricky to explain to people what we mean, but I gave you some examples already of the types of research that we do and why kind of the traditional interventional or health research doesn't fit that. After multiple rounds of reviews of papers and discussions, we have still not found a better way to describe what it is that we are actually doing. So we have managed to stick to that for the moment, but maybe it's still not representational enough. It's difficult to find short wording for what we're actually trying to do. If anybody has any suggestions at any point, please let us know, although I don't know if it makes sense to change now as well. So NIROES is a collaboration that has contributions or contributors at different career levels. So we've had people come in to help and work with us from master's level to professor level. It makes it very good because not only do you have very good expertise or input from people who have a lot of experience in this field, but we also have people who are quite new to it and are learning the methodologies, and that helps us to make sure that the tools and the things that we are working on are accessible to people who are learning to use them for the first time. Our collaborators also come from different fields of research, mainly within psychology, but psychology in itself is very diverse, and we have people who really work with different methodologies and different topics. But we also had collaborators from ecology, for instance. So we try to engage other people as well. And our collaborators are in North America, Europe, Asia, and Australia for the moment. We might be expanding. And so going back to the problems that we have tried to tackle with our projects, Project 1 has focused mainly on trying to find guidance tools aligned with aims and methods, trying to tackle the PICOs, which is not really fitting, and on open and reproducible practices. So we actually decided very ambitiously at that point that we will create a new tool that will help to address these problems. And now we have the non-intervention open and reproducible systematic reviews tool that we call NIRO-SR. And it has been published, I think, last year in Meta-Psychology. The tool is composed of a short glossary of terms, and then we have two parts, Part A and Part B. Part A is about the preparation of the protocol, and we strongly encourage people to pre-register the protocol. So when they kind of come up with their methodology to deposit the protocol in a repository somewhere online, it can be under embargo, which means it won't be openly accessible, or it can be openly accessible. Embargoes run out anyway, so it does end up being openly accessible in the end anyway. In this part, we also talk about some guidance about pre-registration. So why, when, and where. So for those who have not done this before, we've tried to be quite provide the instructions that they need to feel confident how to do this. And we have the systematic review protocol guidelines that should be the things that should be put into the document of the pre-registration. And then we come up with part B, which is what we call the reporting the review part, which is more about kind of how to make sure that all of the elements are appropriately reported. And again, we put a big emphasis on openly sharing materials. So any documents that have been used throughout the process of systematic reviews, for instance, the data extraction instructions that reviewers get, to make them openly available together with the report, so that maybe other people who wish to do a similar review some years in the future can have access to your methodology exactly as it was delivered at the time. So here we have kind of tried to ensure this openness and transparency and enabling reproducibility as much as possible within this context. One example here of how we try to solve the PICOS issue is that we have moved away from PICOS as the acronym and have created bullet points that suggest what should be included in the review research question that is more specific to non-interventional research and focuses on the outcome measures of interest that are normally called the dependent variables for us, or the independent variables as well. And then we place some more focus on the design of the study and covariates of interest. And we take into consideration that in case of a methodological systematic review, it might not even be possible to fit all of these bullet points that we propose here. And in this case, to make sure that the research question focuses on the operationalization of the context and the focus of what is actually being investigated. So here we also had quite a bit of barriers when we tried to publish the paper. I don't remember how many journals we submitted this to, but the barriers were to do with the fact that because the field of systematic reviews is so rich in the health and clinical fields, our reviewers couldn't really understand why we need a new tool and why interventional research is so different to the research that we do. And if there exist so many guidelines already that are well used and have been validated in so many publications, why do we want to introduce something new? So I can understand this point of view, but it has been very difficult. We have come up with lots of different tables with examples to illustrate why a research question that is non-interventional is different. And why would we need a slightly different guidance, and what is the problem? And we try to explain that there people who have tried to use the guidelines that do exist have ended up adapting them themselves, which leaves us with adaptation of these tools in a non-systematic way. And then we will have a bunch of researchers who say that they have used the same tool, but in reality they follow different practices because they had to change subjectively the procedures. So yeah, in the end we managed to publish it at Meta-Psychology, and this is the title of the paper: An Integrative Framework for Planning and Conducting Non-Intervention Reproducible and Open Systematic Reviews, if you would like to check it out. So now I will tell you a bit about the second project, and coming back to the kind of solutions that we want to have. We were thinking about risk of bias and quality assessment, and we still want to implement the open and reproducible practices here as much as possible. So in our collaboration, we also work with quite a few librarians who are also very passionate about this topic. The librarians are an incredible source that is super helpful to researchers who are trying to do systematic reviews. I cannot emphasize this enough, and they are oriented towards trying to find better ways to enable the application of evidence synthesis and make it more attractive to more researchers to use, which is amazing. So the librarians on our team have suggested to us that when they advise researchers, there are a couple of tools that have been pretty suitable for interventional research. So maybe it's not that necessarily to straight away come up with a new tool, but we should try and find out what are the problems in the field, or in the field, what are the problems in the available methods, if we think about that. There are lots of different tools that exist for very specific designs and very specific topics. Think about all of them and what we can use for non-interventional research. So that's how we came up with the idea that for project 2, we will look at the risk of bias quality assessment or critical appraisal tools that are available, that have been designed for interventional research or more broadly for research in general. And we will do a scoping review. And our focus will be to look at what tools are suitable to assess the quality and risk of bias on non-intervention primary studies included in evidence synthesis. Here we want to make sure that we look at the degree of relevance of these tools, and also we do try to look at the open and reproducible practices that these tools are evaluating as well. This is not so standard in the tools as far as I know, but we are quite interested in knowing whether there are tools that promote these practices at all as part of the critical appraisal. So for now, we are preparing this as a registered report, and this is almost ready to be submitted for a stage 1 approval. Again, doing this as a registered report is trying to help us to bring the open and reproducible practices into our approach to this topic. So we have written the introduction and the methodology part, and we are just finalizing the bits and pieces about the extraction. So what data exactly we want to extract. We are actually building the database or the data structure already, how we imagine that this will look, and how we are planning to analyze this, the data, to make it as suitable to fit our goals as possible, which has been really eye-opening about this whole process of preparing a scoping review in this way. So we are finishing this off and we will send it for review before we start doing the search and extracting the data. And then we will have reviews from other people who do scoping reviews, and hopefully they will guide us in whether the methodology we have designed is suitable to address this research topic. And following the reviews, we will make some adaptations, and then we will do the search and extract the data and publish our results at the second stage, basically. So this is really exciting, and it's taking the project in a very cool direction. And I'm going to the last part about some ideas that we have going forward. So depending on the results from the scoping review, we will think about whether a new quality assessment or risk of bias tool is needed for non-interventional research. My gut feeling is that probably we will want to do something, but I don't know, because yeah, it's difficult to know what to expect. Actually, for transparency, I can say that we have tried to approach this topic of the risk of bias and quality tools before. So when we started this project, it was a long time ago. I think it was 2021 when we started with this idea. And we started with an initial search, and I don't remember how many papers we had that came out of this search, but there were tons and tons of different tools that could be used for the risk of bias and quality assessment. And we thought about extracting all of the items from these tools and doing some sort of synthesis of this and adapting it to filter out what's not relevant for experimental or cross-sectional research and creating a new tool. But we were so overwhelmed. We felt like we didn't prepare the methodology and the aims of the project were not focused enough. So we kind of abandoned that first goal or the first attempt, and we had to start over. And I think that this very systematic approach that we are trying to do here, or very focused approach before we run the search and extract the data, I think that this is making me feel much more confident that we can manage this task, but I know that there is a lot to be expected with regards to the heterogeneity of results and difficulty in synthesizing the knowledge and drawing the conclusions to find something that will be suitable. So will a new tool be needed? I think so, but we will see. And some other ideas we had in the team were about meta-analytic approaches. So how to extend the NIRO systematic review tools or guidance to also include meta-analysis components or components that are specifically used for meta-analytical research. And here it's an interesting question, because with the types of research that we do in non-interventional studies, when we kind of measure, let's say, differences in different conditions on a cognitive task, the comparison of that is statistically maybe has slightly different assumptions compared to an evaluation of outcome before and after an intervention. So it was an interesting question posed as to whether there is a need to also develop something more specific for the different types of designs in non-interventional research that could come up, and how to approach this question. We have only done some brainstorming about this. We are not doing any projects yet, but we are always open to ideas as well and finding out what would be the most useful. And another part of our ideas was to do with reproducible search strategies. And this was, again, an initiative suggested by some of the librarians in the team. So they wanted to put together guidance on how to create search strategies, because it's not really well known generally when starting. For someone who has not done a lot of evidence synthesis or systematic approaches to literature reviews before, it's quite difficult to do the first search strategy and to know whether we're doing this correctly or appropriately to suit the needs of our study. Unfortunately, because this is like a side project for all of the volunteers in the collaboration, this kind of died out a little bit, but we hope we can refresh it sometime, because we have collected quite a lot of ideas and kind of starting points. We just need to find the time and the people resources to finish this. And so I can end the presentation by saying that we are an open collaboration, and we are always looking for new contributions and new ideas. So any feedback from those who want to use NIRO or have used NIRO is always welcome as well. Sometimes we get emails from students who say that they have never done a systematic review before, and maybe they're doing this as part of the master thesis or something, and they want us to explain different bits and pieces in the tool. And we are also very happy to do that, because for us it's helpful. We can find the limitations and the things that could be explained a bit more clearly in the tool for those who are new users. And for the students, hopefully it makes the experience better for them, and they are encouraged to continue working with systematic reviews and evidence synthesis in the future as well. In the context of the credibility revolution, we think that synthesizing the data and the information that has been published before on a given topic is hugely important, and especially thinking about the kind of constantly expanding literature that it's not possible to kind of keep up with anymore. It's super important to find ways of being able to know the field in a systematic way, reducing the bias that we ourselves have as researchers with certain experiences, also the biases that we know happen with publication processes. And the systematic reviews is one possibility of making this happen. So if you have anything that you would like to share, or if you're interested in the collaborations, you can email me or my colleague Jade. Jade is not here with us today, unfortunately, but if you look at our publication, her email address normally is listed somewhere as well, and we are both very open to hear any comments or suggestions. And I think that this is it. Do I have a thank you slide? Yes, I do. Sometimes I forget, but not today. So thank you for listening. I appreciate your time, and I hope you enjoyed it as well.
Thank you very much, Marta. We've got plenty of time for questions and discussions, so the floor is open. Please feel free to either punch your question into the chat or use the raise hand feature on Zoom, and we can call on you.
Should I stop sharing so we can see each other, or?
If you like.
Okay. I can bring up the slides if needed.
Sure. Yeah.
I have just a quick question, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So, yeah, thank you. It was a great talk. I just need a clarification, because I'm not a psychologist. You talk about experiments versus, you know, as non-intervention research.
Yeah.
And so we don't, you know, some of us kind of put those two things together, but maybe you can explain to me a little bit about what, you know, when you talk about an experiment as a non-intervention research, maybe you can talk to me a little bit about what it means for you, what an experiment means for you. Yeah.
Yes, no problem. So in an experiment, let's say I am not looking to evaluate how an intervention works and whether it's whether the outcome changes as an effect of giving the participant something that they can work with, if that makes sense. So let's imagine an intervention for improving attention. We can assign a participant to do 5 days of training attention, and we give them a task before and after to check whether the intervention works. In an experiment or experimental research, we are not so much interested in how the intervention works. We assume that the intervention is a tool that brings change already. So we assume that it works. And now we want to learn something about what happens in different conditions, let's say. So with the attention example, we can have a participant who is doing an attentional task that is not meant for the participant to get better with their attention. We are just testing how good they are at paying attention to some kind of stimuli. And then we will give them different distractors. For instance, we will play distracting sounds, and we will see how they react in this condition and whether something changes to the attention as an effect of that. So here, the task that they're doing with the attention, we already know that it measures attention. We don't want to evaluate that. We just want to see how the attention behaves in the different conditions. Does that help with the?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Actually, maybe can I just push on it a little bit further? So, I mean, would you also classify, like, I guess, how would cross-sectional studies or, right, studies that just look at the correlates of a phenomenon fit into your schema?
Yeah, so it's not necessarily experimental research in this scenario, although there are kind of cross-sectional experimental designs as well. But if we think about the correlates and the cross-sectional designs themselves, the principle is similar in the way that there is no application of, or in principle, there doesn't have to be an application of the intervention that is supposed to change the outcome before and after. But we try to measure something and compare it between different groups or between different conditions that we have an assumption for. So in a way, we still have the same kind of way of thinking about the dependent variable, the independent variable, the covariates, etc., that are used in the experimental research.
Okay. So I think I'll offer a comment and a question.
Yes.
So the comment is first just to affirm that I think it's really useful to have this work, and it's like the problem is something that I see all the time, both in teaching and in like my editorial work. At Psychological Bulletin, we get like a very wide scope of reviews. And methodological quality has been, or like how to assess the methodological quality of included studies has been a sticking point, you know, in a lot of the reviews that I've seen. It seems like, right, reviewers really do tend to try and, they try to use the standard tools that are available, which like predominantly come out of, you know, intervention research in health sciences, and end up, you know, it's just like it's often a very awkward fit, right? Like if you're doing, you know, doing like basic experimental research on cognitive processes, then like worrying about the blinding of participants and blinding of outcome assessors, like in the Cochrane risk of bias tool, it's just silly. It's a waste of time.
Yeah.
Right? And so, you know, I often find myself making the argument that, you know, the quality assessment really needs to be contextualized, needs to be specific to the research context that you're looking at. But then, you know, if I make that argument, I don't really have great places to point people. Like, what should I tell them to do then, right? If not use the Cochrane tool or the other sort of standard tools out there. So that's my observation. I think the question that comes out of it is well, how do you see, like, or do you feel like do you need to have a like a limited scope to your own tools then? Or like if you're going to develop a new risk of bias assessment, right? Do you need to define a pretty limited scope in order to be able to, so that you don't fall into the same trap as like the Cochrane tool?
Yeah, yeah.
You know what I mean?
We've had these discussions in the team a few times, and it's also relevant to the first tool that we created as well. How much do we specify to psychology and focus on the kind of common psychological experiments, or how much do we try and make it more general? And then we collaborated with the team who prepared the generalized pre-registration form for systematic reviews, which is I think integrated into the OSF now.
Yeah.
So this was a big discussion about the kind of generalization and making things more focused and specific. And we think that with the generalized tools that are like super wide scope, there is a risk of not doing good enough job and not paying attention to the specifically relevant things that are needed for each individual systematic review, let's say. But then it kind of also already gives like a skeleton where to work from. And the idea with the OSF team was that then people who work on those specific areas where they have expertise and they know what to expect and how to evaluate the risk of bias, for instance, they should hopefully with time come up with their own set of criteria that can be added on to the generalized forms. So that is a nice idea, but then it also is not very clear for us how to approach our work in this case, because we still have to make a decision for whether we try to create something that is a bit more general or a bit more focused. So I think in the end, my response to you is we don't know. And it's a difficult thing to figure out. And we will have to make a decision, but I don't think that there is a perfect decision that can be made in this situation. There will still be more work that needs to be done to make up for the areas that we don't touch.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think maybe there's the part of it might be about just changing people's perspective on the use of the tools, right? Like just throughout emphasizing the need for, or like the acceptability and the benefits of adaptation. Because like just by temperament, systematic reviewers, at least the ones that I know, tend to be kind of type A, rule following, right? Terry's like, what?
Yeah.
No, never. So like, letting people know that they, actually need to use their heads and like think and justify the approaches that they use rather than just blindly following the rules.
Yes, exactly. And not to just check a box in what the editor is expecting when they say we want you to follow this guideline, because that's it causes a huge barrier, especially in those more kind of general journals that just publish evidence synthesis regardless of the topic, right? And then they require that all of these will follow the same guidelines, and then they can't.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, I threw the authors under the bus, right? We should throw the editors under the bus in that respect.
In some situations, I mean, it's not the case in all of the journals, but it does happen. And the authors try to meet the expectations, and instead of thinking about the limitations, they tick the box.
Other questions, folks? The other one I was curious about is just if so you're framing some of the efforts around risk of bias. Do you have any thoughts on like the conceptualizing this sort of assessment in terms of study quality or methodological quality versus risk of bias?
Yes, and we also have reporting quality, which is another thing that can be thrown into the mix. Yeah, so basically we think that in the general pool of different tools that we have available, the terms are used in a bit of a confusing way. So it's difficult to pinpoint which tool is assessing what. It's difficult because they sometimes call themselves a risk of bias tool, but actually maybe they're not really assessing risk of bias, but that's what they're saying. And then thinking also from the point of view that what is the most helpful to a systematic review, and how can a systematic reviewer use the information to inform their evidence synthesis. So we're taking all of this into consideration. I think because we're doing a scoping review at the moment, we will be taking the data on what the tool itself calls itself. I don't think that for the moment we are planning analysis of the actual content to figure out what it actually is, not what it states that it is. But maybe that would be interesting. I think when we have the first round of reviews from the registered report, we might probably get some suggestions like that. But yeah, we don't have an answer for this either. We know that it's a difficult thing to figure out, and hopefully the scoping review will help us to kind of shed some light on the complexity of these different approaches and how they can inform, how they can be useful for systematic reviews, and what should be used actually, in what way. Yeah, because systematic, reporting quality doesn't necessarily mean that there are biases. If it's low reporting quality, it doesn't mean that the risk of bias is high. And so it really is difficult to figure out when they confuse the terms like this. But we have a model. I don't have a slide here for the registered report that we're writing, but we cover or we will try to see if the tools cover different levels of bias. So that would be the bias from the publications, so how most of the studies are report positive results, and then the bias from the reviewers themselves, what angle they are coming to the studies from, and then biases within individual studies as well. So the issue of bias is also complex in itself, and it comes in many levels for the systematic reviews.
I'll give it one last call. Get your drinks now. Okay, well, Marta, thank you very much again for joining us, especially on your Friday evening.
It's okay.
We really appreciate you coming to share your work.
Thank you so much.
And we will be back next month with Zhipeng Hu from Northwestern University. He's going to be sharing some new work on the automated screening or using ways to determine when to stop screening in a systematic review, especially if you're using like automated, like machine learning tools to augment your screening process. Thanks all for coming, and we'll see you next month.
Thank you.